Sorry about the delays. This is Rich's story, part two. Just talking about Miller Newton. And Rich, take it away.
Okay. Dr. Virgil Miller Newton. The first time I met him, like I was saying before, was at that first meeting, the parents' meeting, the open meeting. Mm-hmm. And he had this canned speech. Like he was very inspiring as a parent. Like, look, I'm here I am 56 years old, so I can look back on this. And he had this dog and pony show that he would put on every time there was an open meeting, because there was potential clients there. There were other, who knows, there could have been newspapers there, anything, right? Or whatever, or guests. Let's keep it at that. And he put on this dog and pony show, and he said the same speech every single time. And at one point, I could have repeated it verbatim, word for word, just by the virtue of having experienced it repetitively. But he came off, he was very charismatic. He was not a bad-looking guy. He wasn't a wrinkled-up, old, shrubby kind of guy. He was a real man. I guess he was in his 40s or something, late 40s. And he was prone to wearing a brown blazer. Sometimes he'd have a tie on, always a button-up shirt, and he always looked perfectly coiffed. And you could tell he commanded a lot of respect in the room. None of the phasers wanted to get out of hand because they knew what would happen. And I'll get into Miller Newton and his behavior in a minute. And the parents just were enamored with this because he seemed to be like the Messiah. That was like the funny thing, how he worked the parents. They'd have parents, they'd have their own parent meetings. And I'm sure they were conducted. I wasn't in one. I know that they were loosely based on what we did in group. Like fifth phaser mom and dad would stand on the sides of the group while other people talked, and they were responsible to ensure the continuity of the meeting, blah, blah, blah. But inevitably, it was always supervised by staff.
I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. It was supervised by staff with the parent meetings. And they would encourage the parents to talk about things that were, incredibly private, that you would never normally talk to a room full of strangers. You got to remember, like, our parents, at least my parents, they were born in the 30s and 40s, man. You didn't air your dirty laundry. Are you crazy? I come from I was raised CIA, Catholic Irish alcoholic, okay? And let me tell you something about the Irish. You just don't do that. You just don't. But what the staff was really doing, besides conducting this fake ass bullshit family counseling nonsense, what they were really doing is collecting little fucking tidbits of information about you. And they'd record the things your parents might say. And that's how, like, in my opinion and my experience, that Miller Newton was able to find that little chink in your armor, that little piece, and be able to just dig. So your poor parents are in this room, confused, frightened, their kids fucking up. They're feeding their fears. The parents are, just by how straight is set up. They're telling these horror stories. Mm-hmm. I don't think as much as some of the kids in there lied about and accentuated things, I think the parents did as well. I have never had a parent tell me that, but by God, you're under peer pressure and everyone's looking at you and you have expectations in this parent group that is it's like going to it's like a lunar surface for them, emotionally. Never been there, it's alien, frightened, you're completely outgunned. Here's 250 parents looking at you like, you're wrong. So you think after a while, I would imagine, geez, I really am this loser fucking parent,
Well, that's what happened to us.
Exactly. I mean, Dave, I've thought about this a lot. And I think it's pretty safe to say everyone knows by now, Straight Incorporated, I don't give a fuck what you think, was a cult. And here's the fucking kicker for me that I figured out. I didn't join a cult. My fucking parents did. Not me. they joined a cult. And this cult has some specific rules. And first and foremost was you gave up your ability to raise your own children the way you see fit because they convinced you that you're a fucked up loser parent that can't control your fucking children, and we got to take care of them. You best sit down and do what the fuck we say. And they did.
They did.
They did, and straight manipulated them out of the love for their children, empowered them to just plow us under without us being able to respond in any other way than I love you, mom and dad. When truth was told, I would guarantee you people have been yelling shit like, go fuck yourself. You're lying. That never happened. That's what you think. Here's what the facts that you're missing. But of course we were never given that ability.
There was no recourse.
There was zero recourse, bro. These were the set of circumstances, and this is how they controlled the parents. You know, and they hit them off with like, your child would be dead without us. I swear to God, how many times have you heard that from a survivor? My parents said, if you didn't go to straight, you would have died. My parents said it to me after I fucking got out of that place.
Dead, insane, or in jail.
Pardon me?
Dead, insane, or in jail.
Oh, yeah. Locked up, fucked up, or covered up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, for any other people that are out there that are survivors that may happen to come across this, you did not join a cult. You did not join a cult. Your parents did. And they subjected you to this. Yeah, you may have done some fucked up things in your life, but 1 + 1 = 2. But in straight bizarro world, 1 + 1 = torture. And that's what they did to us in there. And that's what they did to our parents. That is a torturous thing for someone, a full-grown adult, to be questioned about their morals, their ethics, their religious proclivities, their sexual proclivities, whether they drink or not, what do they do for work. All of these things were subject to being harangued by the staff at straight. And I heard this stuff, like my father and I talked about this. He questioned about their morals, their ethics, their religious proclivities, their sexual proclivity, whether they drink or not. He's the one who told me about these group meetings that they had. And he didn't say it the way I'm telling you. He just talked about what they went over and how uncomfortable he felt. And after a while, he became very comfortable talking about things. But getting back to Virgil Miller Newton, and he was the ringleader of this entire ordeal. And the really, the big trick that Newton had was this ability to turn on a dime from being calm to being a raving lunatic and violent. And most of the times he wouldn't, I mean, he would do violence to the children. I've seen him, I mean, there's a girl that I think we both know. And I mean, he lifted her out of her seat by her chair and dragged her down the fucking aisle, dude. Grabbing some 14-year-old boy by the cusp of his shirt and just throwing him back into group, like physically blowing him back fucking 4 rows or some shit. The kid probably weighed 80 pounds, for Christ's sake. But more importantly than all of that was that ability of his to turn on a dime from being calm and rational. Fuck. The buffer's filled, I think. I'm running my mouth. Yes, there we go. Hey, Dave.
No.
Okay.
No, it's okay.
Anyway, I think what it is I'm talking really fast, and this thing it takes a little while to catch up with me. My mouth's running away with me.
Can you slow down a little bit, Rich?
Well, I got a lot to say, and I'm excited. It's not every day I talk about this. But what I will say about Miller Newton is he was devious. He lied. He was without question. No one could ever question. He was always right, no matter what. He was a child abuser of the highest order. Yes, he physically abused some children, not all of them. However, if you think about it, here we are, we're trapped in this room, this great big warehouse that was like, for normal people who were never in this place, just imagine, remember that movie Cool Hand Luke when he got in trouble?
Mm-hmm.
One of the punishments was he was put inside a hot box, which was a corrugated steel shack in the middle of the sun. And that's what it was like being inside of that warehouse. It was horrific. It was, as everyone knows, Florida is very humid and hot, and it was unrelenting. But the worst part I would say about Miller Newton, besides his charismatic role as this some kind of visionary leader of this nonsense, was the fear as a person in group. I said it when I was interviewed once before. I remember he would walk into group and I would literally feel myself start to shake. Sometimes he wouldn't do anything. He'd just cruise through group, eyeball everyone with this fake smile. Hey group, how you doing? You know, he'd be positive, whatever. But more times than not, he would come out there and he'd pick someone out. Because Straight kept saying to us, you know, we're going to break you down and build you up like they do in the military. Except the only thing they really did was break you down and trot on you and embarrass you, ridicule you, humiliate you, intimidate you, scare the living shit out of you. I remember the first time, pardon.
Did you, with the fear and the anxiety, and I know when, you know, the executive staff would swoosh open that staff door, you know that sound.
Yes,
the
I could hear
entire group of 350 people, because I had that many in my group as well. And the entire group would just, you could feel everybody at one time just tense.
Yeah.
And within seconds, there was a droplet of water in a swimming pool with 100 sharks.
Yes.
The entire milieu, if you will, shifted. Was that your experience too?
Well, absolutely. Anytime, like someone had brought up in another interview about the chain of command, there was levels of staff. You got staff trainees, you got junior staff, you got senior staff supervisor. Then you have someone else who works as a mouthpiece between staff and the office. There was a hierarchy there. And the higher up that chain went, the greater the fear once they walked into that room. Because you got to remember that this is 1982. Addiction is such a new field of treatment. They were burning sage and shaking rattles over people. They didn't know what to do with it. And these guys portrayed themselves as the experts, but man, when they walked in that room, the higher up the rung it went, the more fear. You could taste it. You could smell it. You know how I can smell that's real.
It's tangible.
Palpable. God, the hair on my arm stand up just to think about that. How frightened I was. For people who've never been in this place, I remember it was like being frightened 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The cortisol that was going on, that was being delivered into my nervous system as a result of that, must have been incredible. The staff was, I mean, there was some okay people in there. I can't condemn all of the staff, because having time to look back, I'm not talking about Miller Newton anymore. I'm talking about people who worked their way through the program, went through staff training, did all this stuff. Staff was really like another phase, if you ask me. It was like another phase, because guess what? When staff fucked up, guess who sat on first row seat one? Staff. I seen that happen a couple of times over my Goddamn thing.
Oh, Rich, here we go.
Yeah. So, like I was saying, staff was like another phase. They had their own rules they had to follow. If they broke them, they would wind up back on day one, seat one. Not all of them were bad. They had objectives they had to follow in order to be allowed to run these groups for the good doctor. And if they messed up, they were subject to being set back down in group. So they had their own pressures that were separate from our own. People sitting in group just weren't there yet. But there were staff members in the group that weren't there yet. But you got to remember, like, these are kids, dude. We're talking, maybe they may have been 22 or something by the time they got to that point. Who knows? But I think anyone, whether they were in this program or not, just in general, children can be inhumanly cruel. Especially if they're put into a position.
That's very true, Rich. I think back a certain.
Especially if they're put into a power position.
I see when I look back several staff members that I remember when they came in, they accelerate through the program. I get out of the program and they turn into the most vicious, vile, cruel individuals. I hear about it 10, 15, 20 years later, and I'm like, he was such a panty waste to begin with, and now he's making little girls cry, and little boys cry.
Yes. I can name names. I'm not going to do that. I don't have to do that. I think a lot of us know same names that were people who were cruel to us. I don't have to do that. I think a lot of us know same names that were people who were cruel to us. You know, I've coined a term, and I call it Lords of the Animal Farm. That's what those staff members were, the Lords of the Animal Farm. And one of the quotes out of that book, Animal Farm, is, some animals are more equal than others. And if there's one other place on earth that expressed that profusely, it was Straight Incorporated. There were scapegoats in that group. There were people that would be picked out incessantly. And they were like the tackling dummy for the group. And it was vicious, Dave. You know what I mean by that. But for people who've never experienced it, I can't tell you the abject horror of being asked, you know, okay, Rich Morosky, stand up and share on whatever ridiculous group there was that day. And you're sharing, and then your peripheral vision, one arm goes up. One arm goes up and it starts doing this motivate. Just one arm. Like from the rear of the group, it could be on the girl's side. And you knew what was coming next. And I'll tell you what, I'd break out in a sweat like a Pollock at a spelling bee.
It was a horrible experience because as soon as that one hand goes up, a second hand would go up.
Yes.
The third hand would go up. Now there's a competition between the three, and you're about to get stripped. I mean, you're about to get baked like nobody else's business.
Oh, indeed.
I remember that very well.
It was frightening. Even when you were doing good, you know, you're advancing in your phases. You're doing all these ridiculous rules. You know what? Most of the Straight was about talking about the fucking rules, for fuck's sake. And
what was the first and most important rule there, Rich?
Go fuck yourself, Newton. Sorry. Honesty.
And isn't it kind of fucked up that in order to be honest, it was best to lie?
Well, yes, I agree with you. There were kids in there, but you could tell they were making it up. I mean, look, dude, I was a kid that, I sold pot. I knew I was in the drug world, whatever. I don't want to call it that. It just, and you could tell. It's very simple when you're that age. You could identify people who, the jargon, how they talk about it, how things roll off their tongue. And other times you could tell this 13-year-old girl's lying about snorting lines of cocaine with her neighbor. It's like, are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't lie that. I mean, that's something I'm going to tell you right now, Dave. I didn't lie that very much about my past. I had a past. I was a confused, angry, testosterone-filled kid, and I made plenty. Sorry, wife tried to call me. I made plenty of mistakes and screwed up. But some of these kids in there, they did make up stories, and they had to, because it was in order to get by in there, you had to comply. And what straight demanded out of you was a very narrow window of things you could respond with as far as your past is concerned. You couldn't sit there and say, no, I don't have a drug problem. That would elicit an immediate, swift, violent response. Anything from being smashed down into your chair and your arms held at awkward positions, twisting them and holding you down. It could be taken into an intake room with 3 other phasers, and they literally beat the fucking shit out of you in there. Literally, I've done it. I mean, I was that guy. There's no pride in what I say. There's no pride in what I say about that. I just know it to be true. And I was not a willing participant of that. Not in the slightest. And it's difficult to.
Rich?
Sure.
Can I ask you this? That compliance that you were talking about, was there? And then earlier you were talking about being an Irishman, and now you're going to have to comply. What's that dichotomy like? What's going on between your ears at that point?
Well, you sit there long enough in that group. And you begin to fantasize about a couple of things, or at least I did. One, that the FBI was going to smash the doors in and save us all, which never happened. B, how the fuck do I get out of here? How do I get out of this place? How do I not get assaulted, starved, beaten? And that's when my experience of straight, I created an altar, like an altar consciousness, or I don't know the right word for it. And I created whole other,
right?
And I put on this persona, and it was out of absolute abject fear that I had to do that stuff, So I had to create this veneer. I had to create another Rich, and it fractured my personality. Being in straight, you were never good enough. You were always up. And in order for me to survive in there, I fractured my personality. It's like I took the real Rich and put myself into a pixel-sized spot in the interior of my brain, who I was on the inside. And this altar was the one that was living my life while I was straight. Maybe it's a variant on disassociation. I can't really say. But that's what I did. They one of their things in there is you can't con a con. Remember that phrase?
I do.
A lot of liars. Guess what? I pulled off one of the biggest lies in my entire
Bullshitter.
Yeah, exactly, bro. And I had to create this persona. It wasn't that difficult to do. Even as a kid growing up, I would float from group to group. I was like a chameleon. I think that's an innate ability everyone has. Straight just accentuated to some point that it became like a real person. And inside of my mind, the real me is like screaming, like, what are you doing? Why did you dislocate that kid's shoulder? Like, what the fuck are you thinking? And you're okay with this? Like that little voice. And the straight voice was like a roaring hurricane in my mind. And it was very difficult to begin to even listen to the real me inside anymore. I had to shut that part of me off. And
Let me
that's the
ask
way.
you this, Rich.
Yeah, man.
Or was there a some sort of a sense of betrayal, a self-betrayal?
Absolutely. I sold out my whatever morals and values I had before I went into that place. I compromised them all. I did things that go so far out of round for me as a person that I was prior to straight, that I was shocked by, truthfully. I was horrified by it. Let's just be real about it. I would be inside of my brain horrified at what I was forced to do. I had to do these things in order to survive. I fucking adapted. And like I said, when I was interviewed another time, I played the game. And as long as the fucking spotlight was on you, and I made sure that the staff always had the spotlight on someone else, I could get through this thing, get up and get the fuck out of here. I did some horrible, despicable things to other children. And I was taught to do that at straight. I was not a cruel child growing up. I wasn't a mean-spirited. I wasn't like that as a person. But this altar I had to create, I just basically did whatever the fuck they told me to do. And I'm not trying to, that's not an excuse. It's really what happened. For me, it was a life or death thing. I thought, I mean, some of the most fucked up how your thinking goes when you're isolated in here. Like, you got to remember, people who've never been in a place like this, there is veritably no contact with anyone. I had no idea what month it was. I had no idea what time of day it was. I had no idea if a month had shifted.
Go ahead.
Sorry, we're having problems, guys. Technology, isn't it cool? Right on. I feel you, man. Well, anyway, I did some wicked things to people in there. These are things that I heard other people doing. And I did them as well, even though I disagree with wholeheartedly. That is in fact the basis of coercion, doing something against one's own will. I would never naturally do these things to anybody. It's not, to this day, I'm not like that. I'm not cruel. But in that environment, when you're faced with the consequences that could go on in there, which could be extensive, mind-numbingly painful, you would do almost anything not to be in the hot seat, so to speak. And that's exactly what I did. If I had to stand on your neck and do things to you in order to get me to progress, that's what I did. Not proud of that stuff. And
No.
you know, it bothers me, and I've made my peace with it. I don't live my life like that anymore. Nor do I treat people like that anymore. I don't treat myself like that.
Yeah, yeah. I know that to be true. I'm thinking you survived a shithole just like I did.
Yes.
I'm wondering, I mean, I know what my life has been like after the fact. I can say that I survived that experience. But as I look back at it now, I've survived every day since. I survived yesterday. What's happened in your life since the program, Rich?
Well, let me tell folks out there that are not familiar with my story. I just hope someone who's never been to straight or has never been involved in trouble teenage gets to see some of these things. I'm going to try and explain it in layman's terms and stay within straight jargon. For any of you parents out there who may find this, you go to a place and they have their own lingo and jargon, and you can't talk to your kids whenever you want to. Major red flags. Run the fuck the other way. Major red flags. Run the fuck the other way. I was brought. Here's something that probably some people. Jesus Christ, you were put in there on your 18th birthday. Why didn't you just fucking live? I mean, I know why. Well, basically, there was no such thing as signing yourself out of straight, even if you were an adult. There was no way.
Did you stay in Florida the whole time?
Pardon me?
Did you stay in Florida your entire program?
No. This is a really fucked up part of my experience in Florida. My father's wife had a son. And of course, straight wants to interview everyone who's in your family. That's part of their way that they sap these poor working families for a lot of money. Their whole premise a lot of times is like, your other child has a drug addict tendencies or druggy tendencies, and we can predict that they're going to get into drugs, so you might as well do this prophylactic treatment, so to speak, and bring them in now. And they tried to pull that shit on my father's wife and her son, and she wouldn't have it. Paul didn't have a fucking drug problem. It's just like me, some other fucking lunkhead kid, you know? And she wouldn't have it. And they threw my father out of the program. Like every week, even as sick as it is, you look forward to seeing your folks in some way or whatever. I don't even know looking forward to it. You just became used to it happening. I'll just leave it at that. And then one day they just disappear. And of course, they don't tell you what happened. Staff's not going to tell you. No one's going to take the time out to inform you. Your parents are thrown out of the program. So I was in this limbo for a couple of months. We're talking 3 months or so, where I had no visitors. So I was in this limbo for a couple of months. We're talking 3 months or so. Life went on and straight. I had no idea if my father was dead. And at one point, I was questioning whether or not I was alive. Did I die, and am I in hell? I know this sounds bizarre. You gotta think, you know, for normal people, I'm cut off from the rest of the world. For me, my world is that warehouse. It is that foster home, as they called them. Way back in the day, they were not host homes. They were called foster homes. And I was being sent to someone else's home at night to get a shower, maybe get fed a couple bowls of cereal, and be put off to bed, and get up. It was just again another day, and another day, and another day. And after a while, it really became just one great big long day. There was no way to separate. At least there was no way to separate. They had me cut off. I mean, that was it. I was in this little world of violence, fear, horror, disgust, fear, and no time to think. There was no time to think while you were in straight. Because, at least for me anyway, I had to be on guard constantly. Oh, God. This is hard to talk about. You know, I didn't think this would be that difficult, honestly. This is the first time, like other times I've been interviewed, at least for me anyway, the questions were more generalized. It wasn't so much about my story as much as this one is, and it's a little crazy.
Rich,
think about it now.
Answer me. I know it is. I know it's difficult, and I appreciate you.
Other times I've been interviewed, the questions were more generalized. It wasn't so much about my story as much as this one is. It's a little crazy.
It's your story. It's the only story you got.
Oh, indeed. But to get back to the question. Yeah, oh yes. To get back to the question.
Little trouble coming through there, Rich.
And his family got thrown out of the program. I was in limbo for a couple of months and straight on first. That was, I don't know, I guess that was my 6th or 7th month on first phase when that happened. And I really lost my mind. That's where that altar really came into play. And I'm grateful for that altar because it protected and shielded the real me. It goes underneath all of that anger and violence. I really lost my mind. That's where that altar really came into play. And I'm grateful for that altar. Insulated myself with that. Shielded the real me. It goes underneath all of that anger and violence. I insulated myself with that. So
what kind of impact did that have as you went through your life?
Well, here, folks, I'm going to tell you something. Once I finally escaped from straight, with a whole other story, that altar didn't go away. It wasn't like I shut it off and put it away like hanging up a suit. I'd become enmeshed with that altar. Here, folks, I'm going to tell you something. Once I finally escaped from straight, with a whole other story, it became part of me, and I became part of it. It wasn't like I shut it off and put it away like hanging up a suit. I became enmeshed with that altar. It became part of me, and I became part of it. And we were stuck.
And that carried on for a while. But what you were telling me is that you were in Florida the whole time.
Well,
and you were 18 years old.
No, I was not in Florida the entire time. During the time I was there, they were opening up their pet project was to have a straight incorporated in the greater Washington, D.C. area. One day, my mom showed up in group in Florida. She's from New Jersey. I mean, here's the fucked up part about straight. No matter if you lived in Alaska, your kid was in Florida, you best show up once a month, or else you and your kid will be out and they'll be active trying to get your money. So my mother flew in from New Jersey once a month. All of a sudden one day, they put a divider up in group, and they took all the kids that were from Virginia, and there were a lot of them, and they put us in a separate room. And we started having Virginia straight sessions while in Florida. Then the most surreal thing is when they moved us from St. Pete to Florida. I'll never forget it. They took us by these ancient school buses to the airport there in Tampa. And they had a plane. It was Bluebird Airlines or something. It's like some off-brand plane. And it was so off-brand that they had, instead of having terminals, they just had a set of stairs that went from the tarmac up to getting into the plane. And prior to me being switched into the Virginia, or me leaving Florida, there's these things called chain of command. You'd have a fifth phaser. They would come over. You'd write your question or whatever your needs were, and then it would go up the chain of command as far as it needed to go. And I put in, I don't want to say hundreds, but I put in a couple of dozen. I do not want to leave Florida. I do not want to go to Virginia. I want to stay here. This is, and it got to the point. The last couple, the fifth phaser made me eat. He'd write it down, little notepad. He'd rip it out, hand it to me, and tell me to eat it. And I ate my own chain of commands at the end.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, like I was saying before, we were rudely interrupted by the internet. At the end, I wrote out all these chain of commands, and the last couple of them, the fifth phaser wrote it down, handed it to me, and told me to eat it. And I ate the chain of command. They refused to answer my question. And I'm an adult now. And according to the law, if you're taken across, that's called kidnap. So as an adult, I was kidnapped by Straight and forced to go to the Springfield, Virginia Straight program and open it. And it was easier, and I realized, it was pretty simple to figure out. Easier for my mom to go to Virginia than it is to go to St. Pete. It's closer.
Sure.
And I know this might piss off some people who are in the program, but I need to tell you, back like 80 to 80, 79 to like 83 or 4 was probably the most violent time. Great. They had no one had sued them yet of any recourse at all. And they basically got away with murder. And it was violent in there. St. Petersburg was a horrific place. It was a very, very, it was a very difficult program. It was a mind fuck. Oh, big time. Big time.
But progressively got, fisticuffs.
Indeed. I was in, those people who were in during that time, indeed. In my opinion, I was in Straight at its roughest and most violent. And I can say without a doubt, Petersburg was very, very violent. And I can say the consequences were bizarre, painful, and often. There was no one watching the kids. I mean, it wasn't like this. Trust me, those execs, they weren't worried. They were not worried about us, what was going on in the group. They were worried about keeping Straight's reputation well, going and meeting civic organizations, eliciting funds from them, all this crazy shit just to make money. They didn't give a fuck about us. And when we were transferred, God, no, they transferred. When we were transferred to Virginia, they put us on this plane. And it must have been really unnerving because they had like stewardesses. Just they were just some ladies, and they handed out crackers or something. And I remember hearing them. Talking, whispering to each other. Why are they all looking straight forward? How come no one's talking? And then all of a sudden, we bust out in a song on this plane. These women I don't know what they must have thought. Was so surreal to me as a participant. I felt embarrassed, but I couldn't show that I was embarrassed. I had to be proud that I was this straightling, and I had the straight shine. Remember that term? You've got the shine. Proud that I was this straightling, and I had the straight shine. That term? Yeah. You got the shine. Damn, dude. I'm not talking about this in a long time. And I was taken up to Virginia, and Virginia was a microcosm of St. Petersburg. Remember, you could get concentrated orange juice. Remember that? Or maybe not. You live in Florida, but you used to buy it in tubes and it was frozen, right? and it was strong, was a concentrate. When they took us out of St. Pete, they shrunk that microcosm down to about 150 kids, and it concentrated the violence. And at that point in time, the execs were really not in group. Brand new program. They were sycophants to these folks over in DC who were involved in straight at the high level of government. I'm not talking about some assemblyman. I'm talking about the fucking vice president of the United States of America. So I used the term Lord's the animal farm before, and it really was a microcosm of St. Petersburg concentrated. And it was so bizarre to be in a group of 100 people instead of 350 people. You want to talk about having the microscope on you? That ramped it up. It ramped up the anxiety, the terror, the terror. Every morning I'd walk in that. We'd get into that rock parking lot behind 5515 Ackland Road in Springfield, Virginia. And as soon as those wheels hit those rocks, my heartbeat would increase. My face would become splotchy. My hands would be sweaty. And nothing had happened other than I saw the fucking building. And I knew what was coming next. It was going to be a grueling minimum 14-hour day. They say 9 to 9. That's a bunch of bullshit. You were there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes you didn't leave until 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And it was so concentrated in there. Everyone was under the microscope, for the junior staff or the senior staff that were children, mind you. You were really under a microscope. And it was anything goes in the very beginning there. I mean, anything goes. Whatever those children said and did, they had no adult supervision whatsoever. None. Nothing. Virginia Straight was, they learned their lessons from the best torturers on the planet. And they took them to Virginia and they refined them to make them even more horrific. There's a possible way. Just how I feel about it. And I know other people may agree with me, and that's okay. That's your experience, this is mine. But one of the things that happened in my benefit, and I think to everyone else's benefit they call us the Mayflower group for some odd reason. All the kids who went from Florida to Virginia were the Mayflower group. The good part that happened in there, since there wasn't 350 kids, they needed to have old comers in order to put people in homes. You know what I mean? Like, what do you do with 150? Maybe you got 20 people that are on phase and the rest of them aren't. Where do you put all these other kids in these foster homes, as they were still called back then? The Virginia Department of Health changed that, and they had to start calling them host homes after that, because foster homes are part of the Division of Family Services, blah, blah, blah. We know what they are. So they started calling them host homes there. Same shit, different name, truthfully. It's just, but that's what happened. But the cool part was, I don't know, cool is the wrong fucking word, dude. Since there were so few of us there, the pressure, I can't even begin to explain to someone that the pressure of being in such a small group with countless constantly changing rules was unbelievable. And they needed old comers. So at that point, I'd been on first phase for 9 freaking months. 9 months. So at that point, I'd been on first phase. I didn't see any visitors whatsoever. I was half crazy when I got there. And I was inevitably able to earn my first talk. Like first you would get talk where you'd be able to sit with your parent with someone on phase monitoring your conversation with your parent. And you could only, it was like going to a confessional. You could only talk about the fucked up things. It was like going to a confessional. You could only talk about. And I'd not been the pleasantest of kid to my mother, and I had plenty to talk to her about in that fashion. Of course, I accentuated it more so, just so the fifth phaser, second phaser wouldn't go back and write a chain of command on me saying Rich was being manipulative, playing eye game. That's a funny word, eye game. Trying to mentally portray to your parents that help in this perpetual hell. Can you see through this veneer? Can you see me screaming inside like an animal that, like a dog being trapped in a room where they just keep scratching the door until their nails break off and they start to bleed. That's what it was like to be inside of me at that point in time. I was desperately trying to get out. I was uncomfortable. Don't think for a minute this veneer, this altar I'm talking about was a comfortable way to fucking live. It was like wearing skin that doesn't fit and it hurt, constantly hurt you. It was like wearing barbs like on armor backward into my body, having that veneer. God damn. Fuck that place. Dude. Anyway, I inevitably, I got talk. The next thing you can get is talk and responsibilities, which meant, yeah, you get to talk to your parents and talk about all this uncomfortable shit in front of a stranger, and you get responsibilities. Now you get to belt loop other people, and you get responsibilities. Now you get to belt loop other people. What do you mean by belt looping? You take your middle finger, this one, you can run it through the back of someone's pants. You take your belt, middle finger, this one, turn your hand around and grab them by the belt. One wore a belt straight. No, everyone had pants with, jeans. And you grab the back of the pants and you controlled them like a fucking puppet. You controlled the speed, what direction they went. If you wanted to be an asshole, you could just pull up on the pants where their toes are just touching the floor, and you're guiding them into the bathroom. You get them up to a urinal, you just put them into the urinal. You could just pull up on the pants where their toes are just fucking believable. And you're guiding them into the bathroom. So you get talking responsibilities. Then after a certain amount of time would go by, then you could ask in Holmes Group. Remember Holmes Group? What old comers would do, people further along the program who were now your caretakers or torturers, whatever you call it, they would write a progress report on you and they'd give it in to the staff. The staff would read their progress report. And I'll never forget the first time I asked to go home, as it was referred to, or go on to second phase. I remember being in Holmes Group, and they held up my little progress report for my old comers, and I could read. The sun was in such a lighting, there was no sun. The lighting was in such a way that I could read through the thin piece of paper.
I'm still here, Rich.
Okay. I could read.
I'm still here.
I was in Holmes. Sorry. Are you recording now? Okay. All right. I could read. I was in Holmes Group, and the way the lighting was, they held up my progress report, and I could read through it. And my old comer had written in red crayon with flames on it, barbecue him. And my heart. And my sunk to the bottom of my stomach, and I was confronted for hours after that. It seemed like I was the blue plate special that day when my very first time I tried to progress. that extended my stay on first phase for another 2 months, maybe closer to 3. And inevitably, I began to, in order to make it on the second phase, that's when this veneer really solidified itself. This altar, I began to be an aggressor in group. I was more and more, I'd be called on in the part of the rap, more so than a participant or someone talking about their problems. I started to get called on because I became a really good confrontational expert. I could, shred you without breaking a sweat. I mean, I would describe it the other day, like having a hurricane blow every leaf off a tree instantaneously, and I had that ability to do that, which allowed me to be inevitably moved on. And that veneer, this altar that I keep talking about, became more and more real, and I became less and less important, or less and less heard inside of my own brain. And the fear mounted even more, because it might sound, hooray, you're off of first phase, isn't this great? The real fear is being put back on first phase. As easy as you can make it on to second phase, you can be put back, just like that. And that's when the real game began. That's when the real mega violence started to happen.
Rich, let's take a short break here, okay? And then we'll get into that, okay?
All right, bro, no problem, man.